You think you're free, but are you? Most people live and die inside invisible cages, built not by tyrants but by their own fear, comfort, and morality. In this video, we'll uncover why most people stay average, through the eyes of Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who understood human nature not as it should be, but as it is. If you've ever wondered why ambition dies in most people before it ever begins, this is for you. They call it virtue, goodness, morality, purity. From childhood, we are told that to be kind is to be rewarded, that honesty opens doors, and that fairness leads to triumph. But what if that is the greatest lie society ever sold? Machiavelli, observing the rulers and merchants of Renaissance Florence, saw the truth with cruel clarity. Virtue without power is weakness. The man who believes goodness alone will bring him success walks willingly into the jaws of those who know better. It is a beautiful illusion, this belief in virtue. It comforts the powerless, it softens the ambitious, and it keeps the strong disguised as saints. Look around. You will see people trapped in their own morality, afraid to offend, desperate to be liked, hoping that the world will recognize their purity. They imagine life as a fair judge, not a ruthless battlefield. And that delusion, more than any external enemy, keeps them average. The average man thinks virtue is its own reward. He believes that by being loyal, humble, and patient, destiny will one day repay him. But Machiavelli would laugh. Life does not reward virtue. It rewards usefulness, intelligence, and timing. The world is a marketplace, and every moral act has a price. Those who cling blindly to goodness without understanding its cost are soon bought, sold, and discarded by those who know the game. A prince, Machiavelli said, must learn not to be good, or rather, he must learn when to appear good, and when to abandon goodness for necessity. Most people never learn this. They are trapped by their own reflection, terrified of appearing cruel, even when cruelty would save them. They measure their worth by approval, not by achievement. And so they live small lives governed by rules that others exploit. Consider the worker who refuses to speak up because he fears being disliked by his superiors. He calls it humility, when in truth it is cowardice. Consider the man who refuses to compete, believing that the good things will come in time. He calls it patience, when in truth it is stagnation. Or the friend who never disagrees, never offends, and never advances, because he mistakes compliance for virtue. These are the citizens of mediocrity, polite, harmless, and easily ruled. Machiavelli understood that morality is a tool, not a master. The powerful use virtue as a mask, a performance that wins trust while they act in their own interest. The average man uses virtue as a cage, an excuse for inaction, a justification for weakness. He tells himself, I am not like them, I am better. But what is the value of being better if you are also powerless? The lion who refuses to hunt because killing is cruel will soon starve. The illusion of virtue survives because it flatters our ego. It tells us that we can be both righteous and rewarded, both pure and powerful. But history contradicts this fantasy. Empires were not built by saints. They were built by those willing to make hard choices. A ruler who hesitates for morality's sake invites rebellion. A merchant who fears appearing greedy loses his fortune to one who does not. Even in friendship, in love, in ambition, the one who hesitates to offend will always kneel before the one who dares. Virtue, when understood, can be weaponized. It becomes a language, one that fools the masses and stabilizes power. A ruler must appear merciful, faithful, humane, but he must also know when these masks must fall. To win, he must not be bound by his image. The crowd judges by appearances. The wise man judges by outcomes. That is the Machiavellian truth most people never accept. The tragedy is not that people are weak, it's that they mistake their weakness for goodness. They believe that moral restraint makes them noble, when it only makes them harmless. They avoid conflict, telling themselves it is maturity. They refuse ambition, calling it contentment. They surrender and call it peace. All the while, those who understand power use their virtue as camouflage, smiling as they conquer quietly. Virtue can be a strength, yes, but only when it is chosen, not obeyed. The man who can act with mercy and cruelty alike, who knows when to show kindness and when to wield fear, he is the one who rises. The rest remain trapped in the illusion, clinging to a morality that protects them from nothing but their own potential. They believe the world is fair. They believe virtue guarantees victory. They believe goodness will one day be recognized by all, and so they wait, patiently, politely, endlessly, as the ambitious take what they never dared to reach for. They say man is a social creature, but Machiavelli would whisper that man is also a slave to the crowd. Most people do not think. They echo. They do not act. They follow. Their greatest fear is not failure, not even death. It is standing alone. The masses live by the comfort of agreement, and so long as their opinions match those of their peers, they feel safe. But greatness is not born in safety. It is born in solitude, in the moments when one dares to think a thought no one else approves of. Look at the crowd. They laugh together, condemn together, and applaud together. They share outrage like a religion and obedience like a virtue. The fear of isolation makes them predictable, controllable, and weak. Machiavelli saw this in princes and peasants alike, that men prefer the company of chains to the loneliness of freedom. To be alone is to be uncertain, to be without the comfort of belonging. And so they trade independence for inclusion, identity for acceptance. The average man does not ask, "What is true?" He asks, "What will they think of me if I say it?" Every decision, every opinion, every ambition must pass through the filter of social approval. He cannot endure disapproval because disapproval is exile, and exile in his mind is death. Yet this is the paradox. The man who fears isolation is already imprisoned. He cannot rise above the crowd because his heart still beats in rhythm with theirs. To lead, one must learn to walk alone. Machiavelli knew that the prince who waits for universal approval will never act. The moment you move against the herd, they will hate you. Not because you are wrong, but because you remind them of their cowardice. Every innovator, every ruler, every visionary begins as an outcast. The crowd mocks before it obeys. It scorns before it imitates. But most men will never experience this path, because they fear the silence that follows when they defy the group. Isolation tests the spirit. When the world turns its back, your voice is all that remains, and most people cannot bear to hear their own thoughts. They depend on noise to drown out doubt. Their opinions come from others, their confidence from praise, their worth from the attention of the mob. This is why the majority stay average, because they cannot bear to lose the comfort of the collective, even when that collective leads them nowhere. Watch how society rewards conformity. It praises the agreeable, promotes the obedient, and mocks those who question. To be average is to be accepted. To be exceptional is to be doubted, criticized, envied. The moment you stand apart, you are accused of arrogance. The moment you think differently, you are called dangerous. The herd defends its mediocrity by attacking individuality, for nothing threatens the average man more than the sight of someone unafraid to stand alone. Machiavelli would tell you that solitude is the crucible of power. When you detach from the noise of the many, you begin to see the structure of the world as it truly is, not as it is narrated. You start to observe motives, weaknesses, and hidden hierarchies. You see how easily people can be led, because they crave the approval of those who lead them. The lonely mind becomes sharp. The collective mind remains dull. Those who endure isolation emerge dangerous, because they no longer need to be liked. And a man who does not need to be liked cannot be controlled. But solitude is a painful teacher. It strips away illusion. It forces you to face the truth that most people cannot even glance at, that belonging often requires betrayal, that comfort breeds mediocrity, and that the path to mastery is walked alone. The average man avoids this suffering by surrounding himself with agreement. He mistakes noise for strength and approval for wisdom. He cannot see that his dependence on others' opinions keeps him small. The fear of isolation is the fear of authenticity. People hide their true nature to preserve acceptance. They suppress ambition to avoid jealousy. They silence truth to escape conflict. And every act of silence is a surrender. Over time, the man who refuses to stand alone forgets who he is. He becomes a shadow of the crowd, reflecting their desires, their opinions, their fears, until nothing of him remains that is original. There is a reason why rulers, thinkers, and conquerors are always lonely figures. They live at a distance, not because they wish to, but because the climb to power leaves no room for company. The higher you rise, the thinner the air, and the fewer who can breathe it beside you. The average man looks up at them and calls them cold, ruthless, arrogant. He does not see that their solitude is the price of vision. To walk alone is to invite misunderstanding, envy, even hatred. But it is also the only way to see the world without distortion. The crowd clings to comfort. The solitary mind grasps truth, and so most remain average, not because they lack talent or intelligence, but because they lack the courage to stand apart when the world demands their obedience. There is a strange sickness that infects most men, a sickness called comfort. They call it peace, stability, a simple life, but Machiavelli would call it by its true name, surrender. The comfort of mediocrity is the most seductive prison ever built, because it does not look like a prison at all. It feels warm, familiar, safe. It promises rest to the weary, reward to the obedient, and contentment to those who stop reaching. Yet beneath its softness lies decay, the slow erosion of ambition, the quiet death of greatness. People think danger destroys them, but it is comfort that truly kills. The man who suffers must adapt, must think, must struggle to survive. But the man who is comfortable stops moving. He trades his hunger for convenience, his fire for ease. He calls it happiness, but it is simply the absence of challenge. And without challenge he rots, smiling all the while, unaware that life has left him behind. Machiavelli observed that most people seek not glory, but security. They fear uncertainty more than failure, change more than mediocrity. The comfortable man builds his life around avoiding discomfort, and in doing so, he builds walls around his potential. He chooses predictability over progress. He prefers the known misery of the present to the uncertain victory of ambition. In the name of safety, he gives away the only thing that could make him truly powerful, his willingness to risk. Look at the modern citizen. He wakes, works, eats, sleeps, and repeats. He calls it routine, but routine is often a disguise for fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of trying and failing. The world tells him this is normal, that contentment is the goal. And so he accepts his mediocrity, not as failure, but as virtue. He tells himself, at least I am stable, at least I am safe. He does not see that what he calls safety is simply stagnation with better furniture. Comfort seduces the spirit with whispers of rest. It tells you that ambition is greed, that wanting more is arrogance, that striving is vanity. It dresses laziness in the language of peace. And once a man believes that peace means stillness, he is finished. Machiavelli knew that power, like life, belongs to those in motion, those who advance while others sleep. Comfort turns men into statues, beautiful perhaps, but lifeless, immovable, soon forgotten. The crowd loves comfort because it absolves them of responsibility. When nothing is at stake, they cannot lose. When they never try, they never fail, but they also never rise. Mediocrity becomes a shield against judgment. I did not succeed, they say, because I did not care to. It is easier to mock ambition than to admit envy. Easier to pretend to be content than to confront one's cowardice. And so they stay in their small lives, calling it wisdom to mask their fear. In the courts of Florence, Machiavelli saw princes destroyed not by their enemies, but by their comfort. Success makes men soft. Once they have gained a taste of power or wealth, they guard it too carefully, afraid to lose it. They stop taking risks, stop innovating, stop fighting. Their caution becomes their downfall. The same happens in ordinary life. The worker who once dreamed of greatness now fears losing his salary. The artist who once sought truth now fears criticism. The thinker who once challenged ideas now fears being excluded. Comfort has replaced hunger. And so they decline, not in an explosion of tragedy, but in a quiet, invisible decay. The average person avoids discomfort as though it were pain, but discomfort is the forge of transformation. It is the test that separates those who wish from those who will. The man who seeks comfort will always serve the man who embraces struggle, for struggle sharpens the mind and hardens the will, while comfort dulls both. Those who live in ease are ruled by those who refuse to rest. There is a peculiar arrogance in mediocrity, the belief that survival alone is success. But survival is the lowest measure of existence. Even animals survive. The human mind was not built merely to exist, but to conquer, to create, to expand. Yet the comforted man no longer desires to rule his world. He only wishes not to be disturbed. His kingdom is his couch, his victory, his routine. And when history moves without him, he calls it fate, never realizing it was his own choice. Machiavelli would remind you that no great achievement was born in comfort. Empires were built in chaos. Genius was born in struggle. Power was forged in uncertainty. To seek comfort is to seek the very thing that keeps you average. It gives pleasure but takes purpose. It gives peace but steals power. The man who clings to it may never feel pain, but he will also never feel life. Most people wander through life as if blindfolded, reacting to every event with emotion, never with calculation. They mistake movement for progress and passion for purpose. Machiavelli saw this flaw in nearly every man. The inability to think beyond the moment, to see life not as a story of feelings but as a game of power. The world to the unstrategic feels chaotic and unfair, but to those who understand its structure, every chaos hides a pattern, and every loss is merely a move in a larger plan. The average person does not plan. He reacts. He is tossed between impulses like a leaf in the wind, ruled by whatever he feels in the present. He falls in love and calls it destiny. He fails and calls it misfortune. He obeys his anger, his fear, his envy, believing these emotions to be truth. But emotions are the language of the masses, not of rulers. The one who cannot control them is forever a servant to those who can. Machiavelli understood that the difference between power and weakness lies in foresight. The man who sees 2 steps ahead commands those who see only one. The prince who anticipates betrayal is never betrayed. The merchant who anticipates demand controls the market. The general who anticipates fear turns it into obedience. The world belongs to those who plan while others dream. But planning requires discipline, and discipline is the enemy of comfort, which is why most people prefer to drift. They call it going with the flow, as if surrender were wisdom. They pride themselves on being spontaneous, as if unpredictability were a strength. But the truth is simpler. They have no strategy because they fear responsibility. If they never plan, they can always blame fate. If they never aim, they can always excuse the miss. Strategy demands that you admit control, and control demands accountability. That is too heavy a burden for the average soul, who prefers to believe life simply happens to him. Observe how most live. They chase opportunity only when it is visible to everyone. They panic at setbacks, and they confuse reaction for intelligence. They are guided not by principle, but by the urgency of the day. The smallest event, a rumor, a setback, a compliment, redirects their entire direction. They are not men or women of intention, but instruments played by circumstance. Machiavelli would call them pawns, useful to the player, dangerous only to themselves. True strategy begins where emotion ends. It demands patience, the ability to delay pleasure for advantage, to tolerate pain for position. The strategic man acts not for approval but for outcome. When insulted, he smiles. When flattered, he listens but does not believe. He studies people not for affection but for leverage. Most cannot do this. Their pride is too fragile, their hearts too loud. They reveal their intentions with every reaction, every complaint, every boast. They speak when silence would win them more, and they act when stillness would destroy their enemies faster. Life is not fair because life is not random. It is structured around the designs of those who plan. Every institution, every hierarchy, every reward was built by minds that understood the long game. The average person, blind to cause and effect, lives in the illusion of chance. He calls the successful lucky because he cannot comprehend preparation. He sees only the moment of victory, never the years of positioning that made it inevitable. Machiavelli saw that fortune, or Fortuna as he named her, favors not the strongest, but the most prepared. The prince who understands timing bends fortune to his will. The unprepared man calls her cruel because she always strikes when he is unaware. But fortune is not cruel. She simply despises the unstrategic. She gives her gifts to those who anticipate her movements, who treat every small event as a clue to a larger pattern. The unstrategic man cannot see these patterns because he refuses to look beyond himself. His world begins and ends with his emotions. He asks, "How do I feel?" instead of, "What does this mean?" He lives trapped in the present, unable to learn from the past or shape the future. And because he cannot read the map of cause and effect, he becomes a piece on someone else's board, pushed wherever power decides he must go. The wise, however, live in layers. They think in seasons, not seconds. They see how a smile today can plant a betrayal tomorrow, how an alliance today can turn into a noose in a year. They act in quiet preparation, while others are distracted by noise. When the storm comes, the unstrategic man drowns in confusion, but the strategist simply changes his sails, because he saw the clouds forming long before. Machiavelli did not believe the world rewards the good or the intelligent, only the strategic, the one who knows how to appear good while acting effectively, how to bend appearances to advantage, how to conceal intentions behind charm. That is the person the world calls lucky. The rest call themselves victims of circumstance, never realizing that their tragedy began the moment they stopped thinking ahead. Dependency on approval. There is no chain heavier than the need to be liked. It is invisible, but it binds more tightly than iron. Machiavelli saw that most men do not live for themselves. They live for the gaze of others. Every action, every opinion, every decision bends toward approval. They crave praise more than power, and because of this they are ruled by those who can grant it. The desire to be liked is the softest form of slavery, for it makes a man his own jailer. The average person measures worth not by achievement, but by applause. If no one sees his virtue, he feels it is wasted. If no one praises his efforts, he doubts their value. He builds his life as a performance, carefully crafted to please the audience of the crowd. But crowds are fickle. What they love today, they despise tomorrow. The man who chases their approval spends his life running in circles, adjusting himself to whatever earns him attention. He becomes nothing more than a reflection of others' expectations, a mask without a face. Machiavelli knew that to depend on approval is to surrender control. A prince who rules by pleasing his subjects becomes their servant. A thinker who fears offense remains silent while lies dominate. A man who lives for validation is doomed to imitate whoever gives it to him. The world respects confidence, but it rewards obedience only with more chains. The need to be liked is a weakness easily exploited, because it allows others to govern you without force, through nothing more than your fear of disapproval. Watch how people bend themselves for acceptance. They alter their words, their values, their tone. They apologize for truths that make others uncomfortable. They suppress ambition to avoid envy, and they disguise hunger as humility. They are praised for being kind, considerate, respectful, but what they truly are is afraid. Their politeness is not virtue. It is submission dressed as decency. Machiavelli would tell you that kindness without strength is not goodness. It is dependence. In every society, the rulers understand this weakness. They know that people fear shame more than pain. To control the masses, one must only control what they fear to be seen as immoral, selfish, disloyal, or cruel. The mob does not need to be forced. It polices itself. People silence their own thoughts for fear of exile from the herd, and in that silence, the powerful speak louder. The need for approval keeps order more efficiently than any army. The truth is that those who rise to power are often the least concerned with being liked. The crowd may hate them, but they act. They may offend, but they move. They are free from the prison of reputation, because they understand that approval is not the same as respect. The crowd respects strength even when it despises it. It admires decisiveness even when it condemns it. The man who stands firm in his conviction earns a power that the agreeable will never taste, the power to exist without permission. The dependency on approval destroys the ability to think independently. Every idea is filtered through the question, will they accept me if I say this? Every action must be weighed against the reaction of others. The result is paralysis. A man afraid to act until the crowd has told him what to do. He does not live by reason but by fear. He does not speak truth but consensus. His morality, his ambition, even his happiness are dictated by the shifting winds of opinion. Machiavelli would call such a man harmless, and the harmless are never free. Freedom requires indifference to judgment. It requires the ability to walk alone while others whisper. It demands that one value truth over comfort, respect over popularity, strength over sympathy. Yet the average man will trade all of this for the soft illusion of approval, believing that acceptance equals safety. But approval is not safety. It is dependence disguised as belonging. The greatest deception is that being liked leads to peace. But peace earned through obedience is fragile. It lasts only until the crowd changes its mood. The same people who applaud today will turn tomorrow if it benefits them. Public opinion is not loyal. It serves only itself. And those who build their identity upon it will collapse when the applause fades. The man who cannot bear to be disliked can never act with conviction, for conviction demands confrontation. You can see this disease everywhere, in politics, in business, in friendship. People speak not what they believe, but what they think others want to hear. They avoid truth to protect their image, and in doing so, they lose their integrity. They tell themselves they are being wise, diplomatic, balanced, but Machiavelli would say they are merely weak. The man who cannot offend cannot rule. The man who must be liked cannot lead. The man who lives for others' approval will forever remain a servant to their expectations. Inability to exploit opportunity. Fortune does not wait. She arrives suddenly without warning, dressed in chaos and disguise. Machiavelli said that fortune is like a woman. She favors the bold and punishes the cautious. Most men, however, are too timid to seize her when she appears. They wait for certainty, for signs, for perfect timing that never comes. They pray for opportunity, but when it finally knocks, they tremble and hide. Their hesitation is not humility, it is fear disguised as prudence. And it is this fear that keeps them average. The average man dreams of success, as if it were a gift that will one day descend upon him. He does not understand that opportunity does not arrive wrapped in comfort. It comes in the form of risk, uncertainty, and danger. It demands that one act before the path is clear, that one leap before the ground is visible. The wise man acts when others are thinking. The bold man acts when others are doubting. The world belongs to those who dare to interrupt hesitation with action. Machiavelli observed that fortune tests men not by their desire, but by their readiness. Most are unprepared when she calls. They have excuses ready, fears rehearsed, and regrets waiting. They tell themselves it is not the right moment, that the conditions are not favorable. But fortune cares nothing for comfort. She moves with violence and unpredictability, and those who hesitate lose her forever. To seize opportunity requires audacity, not perfection. It demands motion, not permission. Look around and you will see how the cautious live in regret. They speak of what they could have done, of chances that were not meant to be. But their failure was not fate. It was paralysis. They studied every risk until the moment of action had passed. They sought approval before moving, and in doing so, they gave opportunity to those who moved without asking. The truth Machiavelli knew is simple. Fortune smiles not upon the careful, but upon the daring. The masses worship preparation and patience, yet they never realize that overthinking is the enemy of execution. Strategy without action is the illusion of progress. The unprepared man hesitates because he wishes to control every variable. But control is an illusion. No prince ever conquered a throne waiting for certainty. He acts, adjusts, and adapts because in action lies clarity. The cautious man waits for guarantees and receives only regret. Opportunity does not whisper, it roars. It presents itself through conflict, through crisis, through change. But the average person avoids these things, believing them to be misfortunes. He does not see that chaos is the birthplace of power. When others panic, the bold act. When others mourn, the bold rebuild. The moment that frightens the weak is the same moment that crowns the brave. Fortune disguises her gifts behind turmoil, knowing that only those with courage will recognize them. Machiavelli compared fortune to a river, sometimes gentle, sometimes wild. When calm, men ignore it. When it floods, they are destroyed. But the wise build dams and channels in anticipation, preparing to guide its force when the storm comes. Opportunity favors the one who is both daring and prepared, the man who does not wait for the perfect tide, but shapes it. The rest complain about bad luck, never realizing that fortune favors those who act before they are ready. Fear of loss is the enemy of ambition. The average man clings to what little he has, unwilling to risk it for more. He tells himself he is being prudent, but prudence becomes paralysis when it demands safety at all costs. The great men of history were gamblers with discipline. They risked not because they were reckless, but because they understood that stagnation is the greatest danger of all. To remain still while opportunity moves is to move backward. The crowd admires boldness only after it succeeds. Before that, they call it madness. They mock the risk-taker, the dreamer, the strategist who dares to move first. But once he wins, they rewrite the story. They call him genius, visionary, chosen. They do not see that the difference between genius and folly lies only in the outcome. The same act that seems foolish in failure is divine in success. The difference is that the bold were willing to act. The inability to exploit opportunity is not a lack of talent, but a lack of nerve. It is the fear of losing what one already has. It is the weakness of needing certainty before daring to live. Machiavelli understood that life itself is war, and war rewards not the strongest, but the most decisive. The world is conquered by those who see openings where others see obstacles. Fortune gives herself only to those who have the courage to seize her violently when she appears, for she despises hesitation and flees from the timid. Moral cowardice. There is a strange paradox within human nature. People claim to admire courage, yet they live by fear. They worship heroes, but they refuse to act like them. They speak endlessly about justice, honesty, and virtue, yet when the moment comes to stand by these ideals, they retreat. Machiavelli understood this hypocrisy well. He saw that most men are not guided by morality, but by fear of judgment. They are not good because they choose to be. They are good because they are afraid not to be. Moral cowardice hides behind the mask of virtue. It disguises timidity as decency, indecision as conscience, and submission as humility. The average man tells himself he is righteous because he avoids harm. But Machiavelli would say he is righteous only because he lacks the courage to do what must be done. True morality requires strength, because every moral act carries a cost. But most people want the appearance of virtue without the burden of sacrifice. They prefer to look good, rather than to be effective. Machiavelli saw this weakness destroy rulers and common men alike. A prince who fears being called cruel will fail to enforce order. A leader who hesitates to punish treachery invites more of it. A man who refuses to make enemies cannot make progress. The desire to be seen as good makes people predictable, manipulable, and ultimately powerless. Their morality becomes their leash, and those unburdened by such fear will always hold the other end. Listen to how the average man speaks. He says, "I would never do that." When confronted with ruthless action, he condemns ambition as greed, power as corruption, decisiveness as arrogance. He believes his restraint makes him better, but restraint born from fear is not virtue. It is paralysis. Machiavelli would tell you that power and morality are rarely allies. The more you cling to one, the less you command the other. Greatness requires the courage to make hard choices, to act beyond comfort, to accept being misunderstood. The world rewards the appearance of goodness, not its reality. People claim to love honesty, yet they punish truth-tellers. They claim to value justice, yet they despise those who enforce it. They claim to admire strength, yet they call it cruelty when it confronts their weakness. The average man cannot separate morality from emotion. If something feels unpleasant, he calls it wrong. But life does not care about feelings. The laws of power are indifferent to virtue. To succeed, one must learn to act not as the world should be, but as it is. Moral cowardice thrives in comfort. When nothing is at stake, everyone becomes a philosopher of virtue. But when survival is threatened, when security trembles, the same people who preached purity will betray their own words. They will lie, cheat, and abandon principle, not out of strategy, but out of desperation. Machiavelli observed this during war and politics alike. Men speak of virtue in peace, but in danger, they show their nature. The wise man accepts this truth and plans accordingly. The fool denies it and falls victim to it. The fear of being perceived as ruthless is one of the greatest obstacles to achievement. Many possess the skill, intelligence, and opportunity to rise, yet they hesitate at the thought of being disliked. They seek a path that offends no one, a victory that leaves no wound, a triumph that requires no blood. Such a path does not exist. Power demands the sacrifice of innocence. Every conquest leaves someone unhappy. Every advancement threatens someone's comfort. To rise without conflict is a fantasy created by those too timid to pursue greatness. Machiavelli would remind you that cruelty, when necessary and controlled, is more merciful than weakness. A ruler who punishes decisively once saves countless lives later. A man who draws boundaries firmly prevents deeper harm. The average person fears such acts because he cannot distinguish between discipline and brutality, between strategy and evil. He would rather watch chaos unfold than take responsibility for imposing order. He calls it compassion, but it is only cowardice wearing virtue's mask. There is no morality in power that does not first require courage. True moral strength is the ability to act rightly even when it brings hatred, to speak truth even when it costs reputation, to pursue justice even when it risks comfort. The majority cannot bear this weight. They want to be praised for goodness, not tested by it. They live not by conviction but by compliance, and in doing so, they forfeit both virtue and power. The great figures of history, feared, criticized, condemned, all understood what the common man never will, that being moral in a corrupt world is not about appearing righteous, but about choosing the greater necessity over the smaller comfort. The coward hides behind ideals to avoid responsibility. The courageous use ideals to justify decisive action. The difference between them is not wisdom, but will. The average man knows what is right but lacks the heart to act upon it, and so he remains safe, liked, and forever insignificant. The price of freedom. Everyone claims to want freedom, yet few understand what it costs. The word itself is worshipped. People shout it, fight for it, tattoo it on their skin. But Machiavelli would say that freedom is not a gift. It is a burden. It is not something granted by rulers or governments. It is something seized and paid for in full. And the price is always the same: comfort, obedience, and illusion. Most people say they desire freedom, but what they truly want is permission. Permission to live without responsibility, to move without consequence, to believe without thinking. That is not freedom. That is dependence disguised as choice. Machiavelli observed that the human heart secretly fears liberty. True freedom demands self-rule, the ability to govern one's own mind, one's own desires, one's own time. And governance requires discipline. But discipline is harsh, lonely, and relentless. The average man cannot bear to be his own ruler. He prefers to be ruled by another, as long as he can complain about it. He seeks masters who will protect him from risk while allowing him the illusion of independence. He obeys laws not because he believes in order, but because he is afraid of chaos. In truth, he does not want freedom. He wants safety with decoration. There is a reason why men have always chosen the security of servitude over the danger of independence. Freedom exposes you. It leaves you without excuses. When you are free, every failure belongs to you. There is no one left to blame, no authority left to curse. The average man fears that mirror, the reflection that says, "You are responsible for everything you have and everything you lack." So he avoids that reflection by submitting to systems that tell him what to think, what to desire, what to believe. He calls it order, but Machiavelli would call it surrender. In every age, freedom has belonged only to those willing to live without guarantees. The ruler who refuses to obey convention, the thinker who refuses to silence his mind, the warrior who fights without expecting mercy. These are the truly free. They walk without approval, without reassurance, without certainty. They are alone, but their solitude is strength. Meanwhile, the majority seek the false freedom of predictability, the freedom that demands nothing and changes nothing. They want liberty without risk, autonomy without consequence, individuality without isolation. Such a thing does not exist. The irony is that most people voluntarily build their own cages. They fill their lives with habits, obligations, and dependencies that make rebellion impossible. They are enslaved not by force but by comfort. They fear losing their jobs, their status, their approval, their daily routine. All the little securities that make life bearable but meaningless. They trade their power for peace of mind, unaware that both cannot coexist. The man who is comfortable will never be free, because comfort makes him complacent, and complacency invites control. Machiavelli knew that those who seek power must first accept discomfort. Prince cannot rule if he fears the hardships of command. Likewise, a man cannot rule himself if he is unwilling to suffer for his choices. Freedom requires vigilance. It requires constant awareness of your motives and the courage to act on them. The average person avoids such awareness because it is exhausting. It is easier to obey a system than to confront one's own weakness. It is easier to follow rules than to design them. And so, most people remain average, mistaking compliance for peace and dependence for order. Listen to how people speak about freedom. They demand it from others, but they rarely demand it from themselves. They say they want to live as they please, but what pleases them has already been chosen by others, by advertising, by culture, by habit. They are told what to want and then call the pursuit of that desire free will. But freedom is not doing what you want. It is knowing why you want it. It is not the absence of restraint, but the mastery of restraint. To govern yourself is to be free. To be governed by your impulses is to be ruled, even if no master is visible. And this is why most people will never be free. Because freedom, in its purest form, demands everything. Your certainty, your approval, your rest, and sometimes even your peace. It strips you of illusion and demands that you stand naked before consequence. It does not flatter, it tests. And the majority, though they dream of it, cannot bear the weight of its truth. They prefer a softer world, one with rules to follow, masters to blame, and cages that feel like homes. So now you see why most people stay average. It is not fate, nor lack of intelligence, nor the cruelty of fortune. It is a choice, repeated quietly every day. Choice to believe in virtue instead of power, to follow the crowd instead of walking alone, to seek comfort instead of challenge, to act on impulse instead of strategy, to crave approval instead of purpose, to wait for opportunity instead of seizing it, to hide behind morality instead of strength, and to beg for freedom while fearing the cost of it. Machiavelli would tell you that greatness has never belonged to the majority, because the majority will always serve what feels safe. They pray for a life without pain, and in doing so, they reject the very struggle that creates strength. They want to be remembered, but they refuse to risk being hated. They want victory, but they cannot stomach the price. And so they remain where they are, average, comfortable, and powerless. But the few, the rare few, see the world as Machiavelli did. They know that life is not meant to be fair or kind. It is meant to be conquered. They understand that morality, fortune, and freedom bend only to those who act with discipline, strategy, and courage. They accept that to rise above the herd, one must abandon the need to be accepted by it. They are not afraid to appear ruthless, for they know that the ruthless are often simply those who see reality clearly. Most will never take that path, but if you do, if you can tear yourself from comfort, from fear, from the sweet lies that keep the masses asleep, then you will begin to live as Machiavelli intended, not as a dreamer of fairness, but as a master of consequence. The world will not love you for it, but it will move for you. And that, more than anything, is the difference between being remembered and being forgotten.